Hi everyone, this is Sarah O'Keefe and welcome to our Content Strategy for TechCom webcast, which is going to be a Q&A moderated by Erin Vang from Dolby Laboratories, and her interviewee is Alan Pringle from Scriptorium Publishing. I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes for you. We are recording the broadcast, so there will be a recording made available after the fact. You will be able to ask your questions in the Questions tab. You can also use the chat interface. And at this point, I think we will have a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to send your questions in sort of throughout the event and get those in there, and we'll try to integrate them in. So the two people that we have today are Alan, who is one of the co-authors on the Content Strategy book with me, and Erin, and there with her is her dog Schurston, who I believe is a chocolate lab, also known as, was it Captain Lots of Trouble or?
Captain Ridiculous.
Ridiculous Trouble. Captain Ridiculous, yes. We called ours Big Trouble. And Alan put the Content Strategy book up there. Why was that again, Alan?
That would be because it has been my constant companion, and yours for that matter, since, what, January of this year. So.
I'm afraid so. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand you off to Erin. Erin, take it away, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. You see a Twitter address, @ErinVang, that's me, and we're using the hashtag #SharpPringle101. If you're tweeting this conference, please use that. If you have questions that you'd like me to work into the conversation, you can tweet them to me, or you can type them in the little window here in the GoToWebinar. I will get to your questions as soon as I possibly can, and the more we can keep Alan on his toes, the better. So let's keep him jumping.
Great. I look forward to it.
Hey, I never said this would be easy, Alan.
I do know that.
So if you don't like the way I'm steering the interview, then send me better questions, and we'll make this work for you. Not Alan. It's not about him. Oh my gosh, that looks scary.
Yeah.
What is content strategy? It is scary. Okay, that's the perfect opening. First of all, your book is coming out when? How do we get a copy? How much does it cost?
The book is going to be coming out in the next week or two. It's going to start making its way through the distribution channels, both print and EPUB and Kindle, within the next week or two. We also have the entire text of the book at contentstrategy101.com. We'll be putting the final complete text of the book online there this week, actually. So in the next 2 weeks, you'll get to be able to see it print and web and ebook.
Okay. For those of you in the audience who haven't been following the Scriptorium blog lately, well, if you have been, you've been reading samples of the book to come, and you'll know it's a lot of fun. I've been reading it, obviously, the whole thing in order to prepare for this, and I love it. It's really a lot of fun, and I'm realizing that it reads a lot like a TechCom manager's cheat sheet. Breaks everything right down into the steps you need, and it comes complete with all the executive-friendly arguments to get a new content strategy moving inside a company. So I was wondering, are you going to be including the PowerPoint slides that we can use when we go to the boardroom too?
I'm sure a lot of people would love it if we did, but actually we're not going to do that. We're not going to go quite that far for this one, unfortunately.
Oh, darn. I could just picture it, insert your logo here. It would be great.
Exactly.
But it really is practical, and I love how you skip right over the vague advice and you go right into the practical steps. It looks like real life, and you've really kind of written a cookbook for how to get from content strategy beginnerhood into a new phase of writing. It's impressive. So
thank you.
Starting really general, when did content strategy become a thing? I mean, I'd never even heard of it, and then I went to a conference a few years back. It was it was the title of every talk, but it wasn't always clear what the people talking thought content strategy meant. So what does it mean?
Well, from my point of view, what it means is when you're looking at the processes for creating, distributing, and then managing content, that's what I consider to be content strategy.
And by content, you mean technical content, right?
It can, well, and now this book focuses more on the technical content, but it can be any content. Basically, you need to be able to implement some kind of repeatable process for your content, and the focus of this book is on technical content, but that can be true of web content. It can be true of marketing content as well.
Okay. So there's, I checked Amazon. There's a lot of books on content strategy already. Why one more?
A lot of those books focus more, from my point of view, on marketing communications. They focus more on web content. There really isn't anything out there right now that talks about kind of getting more in the nuts and bolts of it for technical communication. And that was why we decided to do this book, to give people, like you said, kind of a primer on what they need to know and think about when developing a strategy for creating, distributing, and managing their technical information.
Okay. So who is your book not for? Who shouldn't bother reading it?
Well, even though the focus is on tech comm, you know, that really is the primary audience, I think it's fair to say that there are people outside of tech comm who could benefit from it as well. I mean, for example, I can think of cases where there's a chunk of information that will appear in marketing, you know, marketing content. It'll appear in, say, support content that the folks, that their support agents are doing, and it'll be in the, you know, a user guide. Because of that sharing, I can see people who are not necessarily in tech comm benefiting from this book, because it makes them kind of realize that, you know, one kernel of information can flow across, you know, all sorts of departments. And I think that's really partially what this book is telling people. Look at technical content from a broader perspective. It is not just a tech comm thing anymore. It really isn't.
You know, this slide is all too, it feels very familiar. I think people like me who are leading a tech comm group for a company do feel a lot like the bear about to fall into the abyss.
Like that dog.
Yeah. Is that a dog? It looks like a bear. Okay. So the dog.
It is a dog.
And I mean,
Yeah.
not even sticky shoes to help keep some traction on that rock.
No.
I mean, it's an overwhelmingly huge problem because, you know, on the one hand, you're keeping things going and you're using the tools you're using, you know, FrameMaker or Word or whatever, and you're also trying to figure out how you could retool, how you could take a completely different approach, which, in you know, trying to escape from the problem of spending your entire day fussing with formatting. You think through what your localization workflow might end up being, and your book advises figuring out what the requirements are before you try to pick a tool. But
Yep.
I think for a lot of us, we actually need to start by looking at tools to understand what even some of the possibilities are. But then we're so quickly overwhelmed trying to understand how we would use this tool that takes an approach we're not familiar with. I don't even know where to start sometimes with this conversation with new people, even with myself, and trying to figure it out. Where do we start?
It's funny you should mention the tools, and there's almost, I think, in technical communication, almost a fixation on tools, and I think Sarah and I coined a phrase, tool myopia, in the book. We get so hung up on what tools can do, and basically it's a prism through which we see, you know, what the possibilities are, and that's really, you're putting on blinders by doing that. And that's why you'll see it in blog posts, you'll hear Sarah say it at presentations, you'll hear us saying it at booths at conferences. Put down the tools and step back. I know it is a hard thing to do because that's what what you touch every day to do your job. You know, it becomes almost a part of you professionally. But you've got to put them down and step back, because if not, you really are limiting yourself of thinking about what needs to happen. When you put the tools down, what you need to do, at least what we suggest you do, is put the tools down and look at your business goals, and not just the tech comm department. I'm talking about the company as a whole. You know, what are the goals for the company? And from there, then you say, how does tech comm, what we're creating, that content, fit into those things? You know, and then from there, you can start looking at what are the tools that can help me to do those things to support what the entire company is doing. Now, there's a lot of simplification going on in what I'm saying, but that's the kind of general scope of the way we like to approach things, as far as, looking at a new strategy for information.
So you talk about the tools being a prism that we look through. It almost sounded like you were saying it's the prison that we live in, but I think I'm just hearing you wrong, right?
Well, it can be that too. I mean, it can really limit you. And I'm sure, there are some great tools out there, do not get me wrong, that really do what they need to do. But the situation you may find yourself in, that tool may no longer be a good fit for you. So that's why you need to kind of step back and look, beyond what the features of a particular tool that you're using can do. That's how we kind of approach it.
Well, and in a content strategy conversation, we're not just talking about one tool either. We're talking about putting together a set of tools in most cases. And it's not exactly something you can download and try out for a few weeks, is it?
Usually not. I mean, yes, getting your hand trial version, that's a great way to look at something. But in a lot of cases, a good thing to consider, if you can do it, is to do a small pilot project. We've even had cases, and I realize not everyone can do what I'm about to talk about, where you can do a pilot on just, say, a smaller chunk of information or a few titles within your documentation library, run the new system, the pilot, just on a few books, but then also still do those books or that information in the old process, so you're kind of running in tandem and you've got a backup, kind of. That's one way you can approach it. Pilots can be extremely valuable. And when you're doing a pilot, too, you're not doing like a full throttle commitment to that tool. And that's one way that you can kind of get around buying licenses for an enormous group or whatever. That's something to consider, especially with authoring tools, which are, if you've got a content management system, I doubt they're going to let you do a 6-month trial run, for a product that can cost upwards of 6 digits. But with authoring tools, sometimes you can work stuff out like that.
So for people who are trying to make a change like this, in addition to having this overwhelming set of choices and a confusing set of tools to put together, you're really trying to figure out too many things all at once. Is there any hope for us? I mean, I think it's no wonder a lot of us dread this process of change. Is there any hope?
There is, and I mean, that's why we wrote the book. There is a way to look at this stuff, and that's why, people hear, I've got to look into a new tool set, and they just like lock up like a deer on the highway with the car coming. They just like, no, I don't want to do it. It can be done, and, there are companies like us, there are consultants that can help, but this book can also help you too, start to get your feet wet in the kinds of things that you need to talk about and think about when you're going to make a move. You take a good, hard, long look at how your technical content fits in what he is trying to do.
So this really all adds up to a great niche for consultancy, I think, because for most of us to think through all the possibilities and work out what our content strategy needs to be at the same time as figuring out how to put tools together that we've never tried to use before, it seems like it's almost inevitable that people end up hiring a consultant to help figure this out.
Sure, and a lot of people do, and a lot of times having a third party in there can be really helpful. For example, when we go in and do a strategy analysis for folks, we'll go in and we'll interview people across the company in all different departments that are affected by or consume the technical content. When you've got a third party going in there and doing that, people may be a little more candid, speak a little more freely than they would if they were talking to, say, the manager of the documentation department. We get a little clearer picture. And that third party perspective is good because you've got someone else who's, kind of helped other people do this, but it also kind of gets you out of being, I don't know if the bad guy is the right word, but it does kind of get you out of that position, and that's a big plus too.
Do you ever end up going into the boardroom with your clients and helping them make the case to executives?
We have helped them with that, and we do, we'll tell them, you have to make a business case, and as you saw in the book, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, at some point, we've got case studies in there, and I hate to, slam the entire profession, but for a long time it seems to me that tech writers have said, I just want to write, I don't want to deal with anything else. The reality of the world today, you can't do that anymore. And I mean, and I say this as someone who is an English major who likes kind of being on my own and writing. It just doesn't work anymore. You've got, all the social media, user-generated content around this. There's that level. And then there's the whole level of we have got to develop a business sense and key into the bigger picture and not just at the department level. We need to look, we need to handle our writing responsibilities, our distribution responsibilities for that content. But we also have to look at how much, what we're doing, how much it costs, the benefits of it and all that stuff. And that really takes a strong business case. And that's what you have to come up with if you want to move to another set of tools. And so that's part of this whole kind of, transformation of our basically of our entire profession. It's becoming something that we just really have to do.
So costs. Are you sure you want to talk about costs? That's the part you don't want to quite get to in a conversation as a consultancy, right? But I'm glad you bring up costs. And go ahead.
Yeah. The thing about costs, yes. It is not cheap to do this in a lot of cases. Some tools, especially some content management systems, you really have to budget and think ahead for these things. It's the nature of the beast. And not only do you have to look at the tool cost, you have to look at, go even wider than that. There I go with my own tool myopia, going right to tool cost. You have to look at your entire process. How efficient is it? Are you wasting time copying and pasting stuff? Is your localization vendor basically translating the same chunk of content over and over and over again? It's not being managed properly. Those are all those kinds of costs. You need to think beyond licensing. So yes, it does cost money to buy tools. It does cost money to hire a consultant to help guide you. But at the same time, if you do your business case and you find out that even with all this, if it is still going to be cheaper and save you money in the long run, then you need to move forward with those tools because, in a year you will be saving money because you've implemented a new process.
So business case, yeah, it always comes down to that when you're trying to shake money loose for a change. And also trying to persuade people that you need a change. And I think when we're doing this full time, and like you said, a lot of us are introverts, we're sitting in our cubes or our offices cranking out words, and someone asks us what the business case is, and I almost freeze up sometimes because it's, never mind business case, the tools we have are god-awful. We need to change. That's my business case, right? But that doesn't really fly in the boardroom. And one thing I really appreciate in your book is that you give a whole bunch of case studies, and you actually walk us through what is the business case, what are the costs that we are so used to that we're not even thinking about them anymore, let alone measuring them, what are the potential gains. Now you say these case studies are from fictitious companies, but actually, I think I've worked at most of those companies.
Oh, I feel sorry for you.
And I'm sure I'm not alone. When people are reading the book, they're gonna wonder who it was you talked to at their job. And that was scary enough, just seeing one bad situation after another and what it was going to take to improve that situation. But then to make it even scarier, you give them all bird names and you've got these bird graphics everywhere. And I started to feel like I was in a Hitchcock movie.
The ducks.
Yeah, the ducks and those fuzzy things, and those are the ducklings, right? I started feeling, did you consider about going with chocolate instead? I mean, would that have been so hard?
we are heavy. Yeah, we're very heavy consumers of chocolate at Scriptorium, and we do not need encouragement in that department at all. I'm afraid we all probably would have gained 20 pounds if we had named stuff after chocolate in the book, but that's not a bad idea. So.
Well, you know, your
Yeah.
scary bird stories, they have a lot of truthiness, let's say, and
Sure.
and most of them do come down to cost, cost before
Yes.
change, cost after change, and you
Yes.
show how to think through the cost, and you give a lot of examples that I think, you know, I could probably just copy and paste from 3 or 4 of those case studies and have my case study ready to go. But a kind of a surprising theme emerged for me that sometimes getting clever about your content strategy just is not worth it, and you say so
Yeah.
right there. So
Yeah.
how often is that the case? How often do you go in and talk through the situation with the company and find that the pain and the cost of changing is just not worth the trouble?
Usually, by the time somebody calls us, they kind of know that they need to change, and we'll have a sales call with them. And at that point, you know, we can talk to them about their business case and kind of figure out. I can think of one case even this year, fairly early this year, we had someone call, someone working as a loan writer in a department, and the only tech comm person in the company. It was a startup. And she was managing, I think it was fewer than a dozen manuals all in Word, and was thinking about moving to more an XML-based publishing scheme. And we started asking her questions and found out there was very little reuse among all those documents. There was no localization at all. And that's when we told her, really, you being on your own with, you know, no localization, no reuse, you don't really have a reason to move out right now, so you don't need to. And that's what we told her. And that does happen sometimes. We'll tell people, based on what you're telling us, we don't see a viable business strategy for you, you know, to make a move. And I know a lot of people, you know, Word, it's old school, it doesn't do what I need it to do or whatever. Yeah, a lot of that's true, but at the same time, you can't just jump to the new shiny thing just because you think it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it boils down to.
So let me get this straight. You actually told somebody to stay with Microsoft Word?
For that circumstance, there was really no reason for them to change. I mean, there was just nothing compelling. I know that sounds horrible, but you have to look at your situation and develop the business case. If it's not there, you can't justify, you know, changing tools.
So maybe you could have, like, at least earned your cost by saying that she needed to switch to Quark Express or something. Did you think about that?
Word perfect.
Word perfect.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want this to, you know, degenerate totally into like a tool slam sort of thing. You know, there are layers of there are levels of tools, and certain tools do things better than others, and it really depends on your particular department circumstance whether or not you need to, you know, move on up, so to speak. So it varies. Yeah,
and Quark Express was great for what it was for. I don't
Sure,
think it was
exactly.
for the jobs we're trying to do, but it is a great tool.
Right.
So
yeah.
One thing I loved about your book is how just about every chapter starts out with really bad news. I mean, your opening sentences, one after another, are grim. And
That's not intentional, but
well, take a look at your opening sentences. Most chapters, you just slam. There's the bad news right there. You start right in. And I found it refreshing because, you know, so many business books are, you know, they're vague and they're upbeat and positive and Pollyanna, and I don't even believe them, you know.
No, that's true. I agree with you. You see something that's super perky, my personal inclination is to kind of shrink away from it. So I understand where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, so I get it. This is going to hurt. Making this kind of a change is going to hurt. It's going to hurt for a long time. And I start to get the impression that even once we get there, it'll still hurt. And as you pointed out, sometimes it's not even worth it. So which kinds of situations do you find are the most likely to benefit from actually going through all that pain?
It's really situational. It depends on your business case. There are times where basically you want to do a complete slash and burn. You don't even want to reuse any of your content. You want to throw out everything. You want to throw out the baby. You want to throw out the bath water. You want to throw out the bathtub and all the bathroom fixtures and everything else, because what you've got is, you know, it's a mess. It is completely, there's no process. It's just chaos. When you're looking at something like that, that's something where you can say, you know what, we just need to chuck it and start from scratch. Now, that's not true for everybody. There are some people who do need to maintain legacy content. They need to move it over. And when you've got that kind of situation, part of your business case, for example, would have to be, how much content do I need to convert? How soon do I need it? You know, how much can I spread it out? Do I need some immediately? Can I kind of spread the pain out over a year, 18 months, whatever? So there's all kinds of things you need to look at in regard to, what you need to do when you're moving to something else. And it all goes back again to business reasons, your business case, and they can help guide you make those kind of decisions that you need to make in regard to conversion or not, complete annihilation or not, or anything in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand that you wrote the chapter on risk management.
I wrote quite a bit of that. I did.
Okay. That one too is refreshing. I almost want to skip the chapters on risk management a lot of times because you get these formulas, probability times cost and divided by the humidity today, and you get some number.
Very clinical.
Yeah, you get some number that doesn't even mean anything, and so after your eyes glaze over, you just sort of move on, and you say you've done your risk management, and you don't take that approach. Instead, you get practical once more, and you list a bunch of typical problems and ways to prepare for them. One of the biggies is change resistance, where the people who are going to be most affected by these changes just don't want to leave their comfortable life where they know what they're doing. They don't want to leave their favorite tools, processes, habits.
Sure.
And I've got a lot of sympathy for that change resistance because writing is hard enough. I mean, you were talking about how this book has been your constant companion for the last year or so. How on earth do you write and juggle all that change and deal with all these new tools that you're trying to find your way around in and still think about how to do good writing?
It is a challenge, and when you start thinking about how you're going to make changes, you need to account for all of that. And the best way to do that, and this is going to sound so hackneyed and so tired, is good communication. This is particularly true if you're a manager. You really need to let people know what you're thinking about doing. You need to get feedback from them, particularly in regard to schedules. For example, you do not want to be doing any content strategy, much less an implementation of a new system when you're 2 months out from a huge new release. You need to take, kind of jump back, look at the big picture of your schedule, and see how you're going to fit any changes in. In a lot of cases, you may have to do a phased approach. Okay, we're going to, and then we've got another 8 months before the next release, so we have a little bit of time where we can maybe do some preliminary investigation. And that's when you maybe start doing some research and planning. Then you have your release. Then you start talking about implementation. Basically, all of us are moving, or a lot of us are moving to modular documentation where, documentation is written in smaller chunks and topics and put back together. You can take a similar kind of approach to content strategy. You can look at the planning parts first, then you can do the implementation separate. Chunk it up into small, digestible chunks that fit in your schedule. Mm-hmm. I know that's probably easier said than done for a lot of people, but it is a reasonable way to approach that.
What's in it for the writers down the road? Will things get better for the writers once they've gone through the painful fire?
Yes, they will, and this is something else a manager can maybe help gently remind people, not in a pushy, ugly kind of way, but if writers are moving to new processes and new tools, they're going to pick up new skills that will benefit them professionally. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize because they're so, I don't want to move from tool X to tool Y. I know tool X so well. Well, there's a very good chance down the road tool X won't be so popular in the tech comm circles, so it won't hurt you to broaden your horizons. And guess what? Your employer, is helping you learn this stuff at their expense. I don't want to sit here and make your employer, doing that into a martyr, but it is something to consider when you are having to make the switch to a new tool set.
Mm-hmm. Um, we do keep coming back to tools, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And speaking of tools, I'm talking hands wildly, and I just knocked the headset cord out of my computer, but I'm back now. Can't be trusted with my tools. So you mentioned some risks related to tools providers, and you know, one that we're looking at Dolby Labs is the possibility that our provider could go out of business.
Sure.
And we happen to be in a tool that's proprietary. Our content would be sort of trapped, and you know, we're looking at the very real risk that some other company's business model is our problem as well. And I'm wondering, how much should we be worrying about that? It seems like the industry is still going through a shakeout, and the clear choices in tools haven't necessarily emerged yet. Do you think we're finally seeing some winners that we can probably count on, or do we still have some shaking out to come where we could be making the wrong choices?
No, I think the latter is probably still true. Don't get me wrong. There's some great choices out there, very solid choices, but you can't always count on everybody being around being the same, you know, a year, 2, 3, 5 out. Things happen. Things change. There are buyouts and whatever else that can affect the viability of your tool. So yes, it's part of your vetting process for a tool, and when I say vetting process, that doesn't mean just listening to marketing fodder and make decisions based on that. Do some digging. Now that there are tons of online forums, and a lot of them are unofficial, that are not really sponsored by the companies that make the tools, go onto those forums, poke around there, talk to your coworkers, go to, you know, social networking sites and ping people and find out, you know, get the lowdown on what's going on with these tools and the kind of experiences people are having. I know Sarah and I have done 2 surveys on people who were getting involved in or already implemented structured authoring over the past 5 years. And the results for both of those surveys showed that people, there were a lot of complaints about tools being oversold and under-vetted by the companies that bought it. So it is a definite concern, and as part of your process for figuring out the quality of the tool, do consider, you know, see if you can figure out what's the chance of this company being around in X years or months. It's something definitely to consider, absolutely.
So it is still very possible that we could choose a completely appropriate tool that will work well for us, and they will still go out of business a few years down the road.
Yes.
What can we do to make sure that if that does happen, we're not just trapped, that we won't have to start over again from scratch, that we'll be able to step out of that into something else without having to have another 2-year migraine?
There's some things you can do to help mitigate it. If you're moving into a proprietary tool, you are kind of locked into that tool and its format. The good thing is, in a lot of cases, if you were very rigorous about applying templates and consistent in how you apply formatting, for example, to content, it will be easier to convert it to something else later. Also, if you go with XML, and it really doesn't matter what flavor it is, that kind of has some built-in protection. If you go to structured authoring based on XML, and there are also, there's several standards out there that you can choose from, because you're in XML, it gives you a bit more freedom in regard to tools because you've got your information in XML. And even if, for example, you go with one XML standard and you end up going to another one later, it is fairly easy to write transformation scenarios that will basically map an element from your old format, from your old XML, to the equivalent element in the new XML if it's got a different name. So there are some things you can do in regard to picking more neutral XML formats that will help you if you get in a situation if you have to switch out of a tool.
Mm-hmm. So is XML really portable, or do we have some tools where the XML is so heavily loaded down with stuff unique to that tool that the fact that it's an XML is really sort of just the beginning of the story?
That is an excellent point. That's a really good point. And there are times where you can add too many bells and whistles that are proprietary to make those files basically proprietary file format, and that is problematic. And I do think one thing you can do, particularly if you're going, implementing a component content management system, what you can do, there's a lot of information, a lot of metadata about that content you can add, for example, to your source content, or you can use a mechanism in the CMS to do it. Your better bet would be to add that information as much as you can to your files, because it makes them more portable if, for example, that CMS vendor either ticks you off, doesn't provide a service you need later, or they go under. So if you have that stuff, your content not so basically loaded down with proprietary stuff, and you keep your metadata within your source content itself, that gives you a little more freedom to walk later on if you need to for whatever reason.
Okay. You talk about how to go through a sensible tool selection. Can you just tell us the answer? I mean, what is the right tool? What are the right tools? There's no one here.
Yeah,
it's just us, Alan. Just you and me.
What's the right tool?
What are the answers?
Yeah, it's what your business case dictates, and it makes people crazy to hear that, because it would be so great to say this tool is great for everybody. But there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There's just not. And contrary to what you may hear from marketing folks at software makers, there is no one-size-fits-all. There is not. And that's just the way that it is, unfortunately.
That certainly sounds true. I was disappointed to see that in the tool selection process, you advise that we bring the IT department along to help figure it out. And there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, if I bring the IT department along and they warn me that things aren't going to work, and then later they don't work, how do I blame them? I mean, where would we be in corporate America if we couldn't blame IT for getting us bogged down?
Oh, here's the thing. I will be the first to admit I have been part of the people who have had this us versus them mentality when it comes to IT. But I have worked on several implementations with Scriptorium lately that have really shown that is not the way you need to go. The sooner you can get your IT department involved, especially if you're thinking about making a big switch with your tools, it's very important. Also now, for example, a consideration we have now that we didn't even have really as much 5 years ago, there are so many more hosted tools out there now. So, for example, you've got to think about bandwidth for, letting those tools, do what they need to do. And who's going to have the answers to the question, do we have enough bandwidth to support this hosted tool? Guess who that is? It's IT. So, that's why you need to get them involved sooner rather than later. You've also got situations where if you're going to do a component content management system, that's a database. And if you install it on site, there's going to be maintenance involved. Guess who's going to probably end up doing that? The IT department. And I don't think it's very nice of folks in any department, tech, comm, or otherwise, to say we're going to use this tool without thinking about the workload they're going to create on another group in the company. So yeah, I'm being a little bit of the devil's advocate here, but we do need to work better with IT and not have this continual kind of tension going between us and them.
So another thing about IT, while reading the book, I had this moment of absolute clarity in realizing that you at Scriptorium really do get it, how it works in the real world. And it's when you said that sooner or later IT is going to ask, well, what about SharePoint?
Yeah.
Yeah, just about every conversation I've had about looking for any kind of a tool, and it doesn't matter if is it page design or a better coffee pot, somehow SharePoint comes into the conversation. And please, what is the fastest way to get past that SharePoint fetish? Or should we actually be looking at SharePoint?
No, well, I mean, if it does what you need it to do, well, I'll tell you what SharePoint is not, and I hate to get too bogged down in tools, but it is not a component content management system. And the sooner you communicate that to IT and show them that, the better off you're going to be if you are going to be doing a component content management system. It may be great for distributing information in completed docs, but for managing the little bits and pieces that you're going to have from like an XML-based workflow, not so much. And the minute you kind of explain it to them, it kind of works. They're very used to the whole object-oriented approach. You know, they put together, you know, applications and programs by getting bits and pieces and assembling them. If you're working in modular documentation, you're doing the same thing, and so you're going to need a tool, a system that can manage all of those little objects, and if you kind of explain it to them in their speak, they will understand it, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. So outside of the tools question, what is content strategy about? One of our audience members is asking, and I think it's a good point. What is it about, really?
You have to look at a repeatable process, and yes, tools are a huge part of that. If you've got a process in place that you can repeat again and again and depend on, that is going to drive down your costs. So that is what's, I think, very important and very essential. And if you've got a process in place, you can also communicate it to people. So you can say, you know, this is how we do things, and it kind of streamlines everything. Another thing that you need to think about is you need to kind of get the tools and say, okay, what do people need? What do our end users need, internal users need? And this can be part of kind of like a little bit of a, an interview session you can do internally, even without doing a big project. You can go to someone, say in your support department, and say, okay, how are you using our technical content now? What are you doing with it? What's working for you? What's not? That's also part of your content strategy, finding out how people are using your content. So that's another huge part of it. Is the content that's out there now really meeting the needs of the people who are using it, whether they're internal or if they're external?
So what if they ask for the wrong stuff?
Well, that's the situation where wrong is relative. You need to listen to what they're saying. I mean, it really is. It's not necessarily wrong, because if it's what they need, it's what you need to be thinking about and looking into. Mm-hmm. You know, how you can satisfy whatever requirement that they have for content.
So a big theme in content strategy is about reusability, about writing a chunk once and using it every place you need it, instead of writing that same paragraph over and over, or that same chapter over and over. I know another big theme is how are you going to get this stuff localized so that you don't have to translate things over and over and over again. Those parts, I think, are pretty clear in my mind, at least. What are some of the other big themes in content strategy that we should be thinking about?
Yes, localization is a huge thing that drives, as you mentioned. That is one thing that can really tip the scale about moving to something, moving to a new process. But I think you also really need to look at how your content is being distributed. For example, we have got now a situation where tablets are becoming really the go-to device for a lot of people, iPads, whatever else. And we have had several customers, there are people, there are technicians out in the field, for example, saying, we want this content on the iPad so we can easily get to it. Well, if you're providing content, say, in a 200 or well, in some cases, 1,000-page PDF, that is not real tablet friendly. And that's a situation where you have got to really do a little bit of prognostication and think about what are people going to need, you know, right now and down the line. And one thing you can do, for example, is take a good look at how your, say, your web content is being displayed. Does it work well on a phone? Does it work well when you're looking at a browser on a computer? Does it look right when you look at it on a browser on your iPad? There are things that you can do to make it adaptive, make it look right in all of these different kinds of devices. And I think that in particular is very important and something that we all need to think about. Basically, how is this content best going to serve people who are using it? And in the case of a technician out in the field, looking at their phone or an iPad, having a small, clean, nice chunk of HTML is a lot better than having an unwieldy PDF and having to flip through it. That also is a huge part of what you need to think about when you're evaluating your content and how you distribute it to your users.
You know, in some companies, PDFs are new thinking. The idea of not printing onto paper and binding in a book and shipping a big heavy box, you know, the idea that you've gone to PDF and you can search it, that's already such a new world thing. Do we now have the problem of getting people off PDFs into something better than PDFs?
Well, it depends on what your customers want. You're going to have some customers and end users who still want PDF, and you'll have to continue to provide that. But you also have to think forward beyond that. So it goes back to your whole, what is your business case for these things? What are your users asking for? What do they need? And if they're using iPads, for example, PDF is probably not the best thing. But there are some, I am sure that there are some industries where people still like their PDFs and still want them, and maybe even printed books. You still have to satisfy that. Just because it's not, you know, the latest 21st century thing does not mean you get to summarily throw it out. If your customers are still calling for it, you should provide it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about actually getting this stuff done, implementing a content strategy.
Sure.
Your chapter on implementation, nice slide, breaks it all down in practical steps, but one thing I couldn't find was advice on how to enforce that authors are actually working in a reusable chunk mindset and following the structures and the guidelines that we're spending a lot of money to figure out in our planning. Mm-hmm. How do we actually enforce that people are writing that way?
Well, it really depends. In some cases, a modular workflow may not be the best for a particular company. I mean, it really depends on what they need. There are some people who are going to need a template-based workflow. There's some people who are going to need, you know, a more modular approach like you're talking about. And it really doesn't matter which way they go, you know, as far as developing a more mature process for their content. What's important from my point of view is that there needs to be a lot of knowledge transfer and training. You cannot, as part of an implementation, not take into account the cost of training. You need to have that as a budget item from the get-go, and it needs to be a consideration. You can spend $100,000 on tools, and if you don't spend a few thousand on training, that $100,000 is going to go to waste. Mm-hmm. You have got to take the time and the money to train people how to properly use the system. It's essential, and basically if you don't, you're asking for failure if you do not do that. So that's a huge part of it. Another aspect of this too is if there is particular style issues or spelling issues or writing to particular grade levels, that should be part of what you're considering as your business requirements when you're looking at your requirements in your business case. Because in some cases, there is some software that can help you automate and enforce that stuff automatically, so a person doesn't do it. You know, when I first got started in this industry, you know, there was such a thing as, you know, a technical editor, a full-time technical editor, and I'm dating myself by saying that's not so true anymore. You know, we've kind of gotten away from that, and a lot of companies don't hire full-time editors anymore. So if you still need some of the things that an editor does, consider looking into the possibility of buying software that can help you with some of that stuff. I'm not saying that software is going to do all the things that an editor is going to do, but it can help you do a lot of those things and automate those processes.
You know, that's something that your comments made me think about is how when the style police are not the boss breathing down your throat or some colleague mm-hmm. that you have to put up with because that's part of your process. When it's actually mm-hmm. a tool, it is less annoying sometimes. Like, none of us get all that mad at the spell checker for telling us we misspelled things.
Right.
There's different problems with spell checkers, like that they don't know how to spell. But so does that carry through, do you find, in style enforcement and writing to the business rules? If the tools are helping with the enforcement, is it less troublesome for authors to kind of not take that as a personal insult, but just take it as something they need to get better at?
I think so, because in a lot of cases it helps you not have to think about that because it guides you. And if you've got something that's guiding you and helping you with that, you can focus on doing what you need to do, which is communicating with the person who's going to end up reading or using your material. So anything, from my point of view, that can help me not worry about all the stuff on the outside, and that includes formatting and all that kind of, that huge, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And if there's anything that can take that workload away from me so I can focus on basically communicating with my end user, that makes me happier. And I think that also makes for a more efficient process overall for everybody.
Mm-hmm. How long do you find that it takes a team of writers to get comfortable and become efficient once a new system is in place?
It really depends on the tool set. There I go with that depend word again. It really depends on the set of tools. If you're talking about a CMS, it can take, not weeks, but months. And it's always good if you're going and doing a big implementation. In addition to your training budget, also try to work in a little pot of money for support, follow-on support, because as you work with the system more and more and get comfortable with it, you'll realize something may not be quite the way that works best for you and you need to tweak it. Well, if you've been working with a consultant, it would be great, for example, to have some money already set aside to help you with that. That's just one way to do it. Or if you've got internal resources, be sure that you've budgeted some of their time to, and that could be the IT department again, to get those folks to help you make those nips and tucks later on if you need to.
Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes left, so audience members, I encourage you to ask your questions here in this little window here if you have them. Time runs out, so be sure to get them in if you want them answered. I'm not sure if you have an answer for it, but I can't resist asking. We have a challenge at our company of not being in a lot of contact with our customers. So it's hard for us to know that we're writing the way our customers can easily understand, if we're giving them the information they need, or if we're giving them information they don't need. We don't currently in our business model have an easy way to get any kind of direct feedback. Do you have any tricks up your sleeve for how a better content strategy can help with that problem?
Well, what you can do is look at how you're distributing your content. And for example, if you're putting out HTML, it could be as easy as putting in, this is starting small, mind you, putting in a little link that generates an email where, have a question about this page, have a comment, they click on the link and they send you an email. It can be as simple as that. That way you're starting to encourage that feedback loop. So that's one kind of simple way to get your toe in the pool, so to speak, of getting feedback from your users. And I realize that is not workable for a lot of people. If you're working on, for example, say, documentation for, say, nuclear warheads, it may not work so well for you to try to do that. You have to know your audience, but if you do have end users who can communicate to you and they're not security concerns, that's one way you could possibly do it.
Also, what about in our company, and this is probably true at a lot of companies, there's the technical communication that the writers are creating that's coming out of the tech comms department, but then there's also all this technical information, knowledge base, in forums, in FAQs, things that the tech support departments are creating. What about getting those connected?
That is a huge part of a good content strategy, and that's what you're talking about really is silos. Everybody is basically writing some of the same content, but they're all maintaining it separately. That's when it's great to maybe step back, pull some content from the different sections, different departments, try and find your overlap. Again, a consultant can sometimes help you do this because sometimes it can get a little prickly trying to extract that information from other people. But that's a very important thing to start looking at. how much can we cut out all of this duplicate writing. Now, I'm not going to say that that information is spun and used the same way across all departments, but there's generally a core or kernel that is something that you can use and share, and that way you can really start to save some money because you're not writing the same thing over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, did you eat your own dog food? How did you put this book together? You know, with Microsoft Word and SharePoint, right? Or PageMaker. Did you use PageMaker?
Yeah. I haven't used PageMaker, I think, since maybe the late 80s or early 90s. But what we did for this book was we did write this book using in Data. We created topics. Because Sarah and I were co-writing this book, it would be a lot easier if we could easily share and move content around, and having more of a topic-based workflow really helped a lot with that. We have stored all our files through Subversion. There is an online Subversion hosting system called Unfuddle. We just put all our files up there and bring down updates as we needed them. And that's how we did it. And we are creating a PDF which will be printed, or is in the process of being printed. Also the EPUB through Transforms that folks in the office, Simon Bate and Ryan Fulger, two of our consultants here, have done some magical things with PDF and EPUB transforms, and you can see what they've done very shortly once these books get out through the distribution channel.
Mm-hmm. What's up for you once the book is out, Alan?
Well, immediately we have got some events. And we really encourage people to attend our webcast. You can go to scriptorium.com events and read about them. But in a month, I'll be in Portland with Sarah at LavaCon, and we'll be talking about the book and any kind of challenges people are having with their technical content. Come over to the booth, talk to us. We'll be giving away copies of the book and drawings and chocolate. We always have chocolate. So check us out. And Sarah will be at the TCOM conference in Germany later this fall as well. So we'll be out and about working with customers and talking to folks out in TechCom land.
Great. So for people who aren't planning to be at these conferences, how can they get more questions answered?
They can contact me directly. My email address is asp@scriptorium.com. I'm at Twitter at Alan Pringle. We also have a Twitter handle set up for the book, Content Strat 101, and you can also read the entire content of the book on web pages at our website, contentstrategy101.com, and you'll be able to buy the book in print, EPUB, and Kindle soon. And I'm fairly certain barnesandnoble.com, bnn.com actually has the book available for pre-order for 33% off the $29.95 U.S. cover price. So I get the book for about $20 printed right now.
Okay, so $20 printed, free if you can deal with it online.
Yeah, and then $10 for the EPUB and Kindle. And those, like I said, the print, EPUB, and Kindle will be out in the next week to 10 days or so.
Great. So when do I get to interview Sarah on her chapters?
I'm sure we can work something out. I'm sure we can work something out with you on that one.
Maybe after hearing us talk for an hour, she's already struck that possibility off her list. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful book. It's extremely helpful. I know I'm going to be using it as my cheat sheet in some meetings I have coming up. You did a great job, and you even made it fun to read. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, audience. If you have questions, you know how to contact Alan. You can reach me on Twitter at Erin Vang. Our hashtag for today is #Pringle101, and the Content Strategy book has its own Twitter identity of Content Strat 101. Thank you for attending. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you.